I think it's about time I continue my MCU journey, at least with the movies that is. Black Widow was released in 2021 and is by Kate Shortland, and follows Natasha, who is currently on the run following the events of Captain America Civil War, and now she must come face to face with her past. And originally I was planning on doing one giant mega review on catching up with the MCU, but upon doing two in the last week, I was a bit burnt out, so instead I'll do what I did with the DCU movies, and that's just review them back to back, so you can expect a lot more MCU content the following days. So the plot of Black Widow is pretty good. I like this whole idea of Natasha coming face to face with her past, which was a great way of making this movie actually relevant, as due to her now being dead in the universe, just making her going on some random mission would have seemed rather forced. And I also really liked the lore behind the Widow program and how they expanded on it, as that was one of the more interesting aspects of the MCU. And as a result, they were able to expand on the themes of child exploitation and trafficking a lot more, which I think was really well done. However, there's one other theme that I felt was really bad, that being the theme of family, which instead of helping the movie actually made it worse. And this ties into the larger problem of this movie, and that being the execution is absolutely atrocious and really makes this entire movie fall apart. First of all, this movie is very tonally inconsistent. Like, let's look at the opening sequence, which is a great scene by the way, but that entire sequence sets up a dark story, and that combined with the Widow program, which is a very dark plot in and of itself, promises you a different than usual MCU movie, but then the rest of the movie is just filled to the brim with jokes and this funny atmosphere, which really is jarring. And it almost feels like this movie is intentionally trying to ignore the darker aspects of the story because it might make the audience feel uncomfortable. So Natasha is decent in this movie. She is charismatic and cool, but her character arc is rather half-assed, and the reason for that I will get to a bit later. So next character we have is Elena, who is rather disappointing, and she's pretty much the complete opposite of Natasha. While her character arc is actually good on how she deals with her family, she's not charismatic or cool at all. And really, I would have liked her character to be a darker version of Natasha, especially since when she was indoctrinated into the Widow program, she was at a much younger age, meaning she was a lot more impressionable to their teachings. But all of that is kind of just swept under the rug. And about the parents, I'm rather on the fence with them. On one hand, they're funny and they have some good chemistry, but on the other hand, they just feel incredibly forced and the character arcs are very rushed. And this leads into the larger problem with all the characters here, and that's that their family dynamic just feels incredibly fake and forced. Like, the parents have done some terrible things to their kids by putting them into the Widow program, which is an act that really can't be forgiven considering the atrocities that they committed against these young girls. But towards the end of the movie, they forgive them anyways and act like they were family all along and it was just an honest mistake, which really made me confused considering they were angry at them at the beginning, but they just forgave them that easily. And this once again goes back to what I was saying and how this movie just intentionally ignores its dark tones in order to push some sort of always believe in your family type narrative. And there is one other character that I'm forgetting, and that's the antagonist. Like, there's two of them actually in this movie. The leader of the Black Widow program, who's rather forgettable. He's just your average, boss dude who controls a bunch of money and people. And then our other antagonist is the Taskmaster, who could have been really cool, especially since he was a really cool dude in the comics, but he ended up being incredibly disappointing in this movie. Like, seriously, he had so much more potential. Like, a dude who could copy anybody's martial arts. He can copy Hawkeye, he can copy Captain America. This guy should have been a menace, but yet he was just stopped that easily, and it really just felt like this dude was a joke all along. So the cinematography in this movie is pretty decent. They have a few good shots, but most of it is filmed like your average blockbuster movie. And the VFX is mostly good. I know a lot of people complaining about it online, and that was one thing I was looking forward to seeing and how they fumbled this, but I was surprised to say that it wasn't that bad. Until I reached the end, however, where it really just went down the drain, especially when the explosions started happening here and there. And the soundtrack is pretty decent. I mean, this is pretty usual for most MCU films, so I wasn't really expecting anything unique. So in conclusion, I'll give Black Widow a 4 out of 10 and recommend it to anybody who wants a spy film with a lot of elements of family. But really, I'm incredibly disappointed in this movie, and probably one of the first MCU movies that I genuinely didn't like. This movie had promised something in the very first act, that being a much darker movie, but then it delivered on something completely different. That combined with the tonal inconsistencies, especially with the forced family dynamic, this movie just ends up feeling like a mess. But really, Natasha has always been an odd character in the MCU, as she is practically just a skilled soldier fighting alongside actual demigods. So she never felt like she actually belonged, and I thought that maybe this movie could change that somehow. But boy, I was wrong.